Hi, everyone. This is Tolik for the Andromeda Galactic Council. Today is Sunday, June 28th, 2020. Thanks for joining us. I'm honored to have with us Dan Brock. Dan is going to be one of our key guest speakers for the 2020 Wopila Gathering conference this year. That's my annual Transformational Shift Events conference that'll take place in the Lipan Apache, Comanche, and Tonkawa Hill Country this coming September the 25th through the 27th. For those of you who don't know Dan, Dan is an AI expert. He's an interdimensional explorer and a multidiscipline cosmic astrologer. I'm going to read some of his bio to give you a better sense of who he is and what he's accomplished. He's a very bright man, so if you bear with me, I'll get through this. Dan has been very busy in the past few years at conferences giving bellwether talks, as I believe the leading multidisciplinary expert in the field of AI, artificial intelligence. Dan says, the relationship between the human condition and the vast fields of artificial intelligence, consciousness, and life have led him to many discoveries that have shed light on the roles all form of technology play in the process of creation. Human technology is changing daily, and with it the nature of our true reality and the definition of what it means to be human. Especially in these times of relentless expansion of transhumanism, is the ever-exerting, ever-increasing stress on our lives. Does this sound familiar? Can we come to terms with this unavoidable situation, successfully negotiating the melding of man and machine into a new form of consciousness or life? That's a question. Dan believes we must challenge all BS. In this, his motto means that BS is challenging all belief systems. A little bit about Dan's career. Although his diverse experience with multidimensional, energetic aspects of human life began at an early age, he received his formal education, his degree in mechanical engineering in 1984. And his professional engineering career includes a stint as a nuclear engineer with the U.S. Department of Defense and as an environmental engineer for the state of Louisiana. Of note, his professional work in the Hollywood film industry, Dan operated his own software company where he developed the soundtrack management software used for the 2009 blockbuster film Avatar. For the last 25 years, the call of higher education and filmmaking replaced a career in engineering. Today, he's involved in a university environment, managing all hardware and software technology for the colleges of theater, film, and television. In Dan's ongoing non-physical exploration of the infinite realms of existence, Dan knows there always remains vast areas untouched within the universal field of information. While continuing to expand his devotion to cosmic astrology, spiritual advocacy, and dowsing, Dan embraces any modality capable of keeping us on track in our earthly mission. Dan Brock, welcome, and thank you for listening as I got through that.
Well, thank you so much. That was a wonderful introduction, and I am so grateful to be here and chatting with you and opening up on some issues here to the audience.
Yeah. As I was going through your dossier, if you will, some of the things that stood out for me included the fact that, not only are you if you will, a well-trained engineer, but you're a multidiscipline engineer who also has a very cosmic and interdimensional perspective as you look at astrology. Because as I'm aware, you just recently started your astrology consulting practice, and it's very different because it takes a much broader cosmic perspective. Can you tell people, would you please share with people why what you do is different than, say, some of the typical astrologers out there?
Well, I think the one of the big differences I have is having the engineering background as part of my education and my experience, and it's just part of who I am. There's a strong component of critical thinking. As an engineer, you're taught the tenets of science and you apply those into the physical world to control things, to produce things, and solve problems and projects. So this mindset that I had, I always enjoyed engineering in terms of a discipline. I just didn't really care much for working as an engineer.
Mm,
And what
okay.
I found is that my real draw here in the last few years has been to combine that critical thinking ability with astrology, which is an empirical. Many people would be hesitant to say this, but it's sort of an empirical science. It's based on 2,000 plus years and more of observational data that has been put together by countless cultures and societies, and represents a vast body of knowledge about the relationship that we have as physical beings in this physical incarnation to the vast mechanical
Mm,
universe that we are a part of. The universe is like a giant machine in a way. We can think of it as from a model standpoint, trying to understand it. It's like a giant machine for the expansion of consciousness. And our relationship to the placement of physical objects in our immediate environment, specifically the solar system, are in many ways directly related to our experience here as 3D beings. So I've found that the astrology is an exceptionally valuable tool to examine the relationship between the patterns in an individual's natal chart, the patterns in transits where the planets are now, and a number of other factors which people have discovered, astrologers have discovered over the years, that are important relationships about astrology relative to the mission of an individual and the life path.
okay. All right. I'm I'm certainly not an expert on astrologers, but I know that there are some key differences between how some, if you will, very prototypical astrologers that many people can find on the web and the work that you're doing. And if you don't mind, and I know I'm being a little focused about this, but I want people to hear sort of like the very specific differences between you and other folks. If I understand this correctly, my words may not be right, but don't you also take into consideration the actual energies, vibrations, frequencies, and the movement of the planets and stars as they relate to who we are today? So when you're providing an assessment of someone, you're not just telling them, oh yes, you were born under the sign of Pisces or born under the sign of Aries or Leo, and these are your typical traits. I know that you're providing a lot more than that. Can you shed some light on that, please?
Absolutely. You know, one of the critical things that I've discovered that's an important aspect of astrology is to look at not only what is typically known as tropical astrology, which uses the tropical system for the position of the zodiac, but also sidereal astrology, which is to position the zodiac into the same sort of perspective and place that it existed 2,000 years ago at the inception of Western astrology. And I consider myself a Western astrologer. And so what I do is I've basically discovered that by looking at both the sidereal and the tropical charts of an individual, I get to peer behind the veil of an individual internally from their sort of surface of their auric field inward, and also
Okay.
to see how that person relates to the outer world. And the outer world is related typically to tropical astrology. The inner world, how we may think about something, can be sometimes different than how others perceive how we think about things or in how we act about those things in the outer world. So this dividing line between the use of tropical and sidereal astrology, I find, is exceptionally useful for analyzing any type of situation where you, for instance, want to have a question or you want to look a little bit deeper into why you do the things that you do the way that you do them.
In your use of the words outer world, are you? I want to find some different words to use. Are you meaning to say how? people that you as a person, not necessarily you, Dan, but how anybody as a person would interact with other people and how those other people would perceive them. Is that what you mean by outer world?
Yes, outer world in the sense that tropical astrology is the form of astrology that we use primarily. When someone says, for instance, that Saturn is in Capricorn, that's a tropical astrology assessment. That
Okay.
is not a sidereal astrology assessment. If you actually look into the heavens, Saturn might be in Capricorn, but it might also be in Sagittarius or
Right.
on the edge of
Right.
Sagittarius. So there's a difference between what we actually see in the heavens, where the planets are in the heavens, which is related to the sidereal astrology, and where the planets are in the human concept of a zodiac, which is the tropical astrology. So when I
Hmm.
talk about the outer world, it incorporates the consciousness of human beings in a collective sense and the reflection of that from our awareness
Ah,
of astrology. So when we interact with other people, which is, we're social creatures, obviously.
right.
So we have to interact with other people. And in doing so, the factors associated with tropical astrology can dominate that interaction. So it's very appropriate, of course, to look at tropical astrology. But on the inside, how you think in your internal thinking processes, I have found that there is a closer relationship to the inner psychology and the inner process that goes on about what you may be perceiving you're doing or want to do, as opposed to what you actually do with regards to the outer world, how your actions are taken by
Ah,
others or interpreted by others.
without yeah, that old expression. Here we go. Secret searching here.
Okay.
Without, we used to say, or some still do, giving away the baby with the bathwater, because I know that this is going to be part of your talk.
Right.
Can you please address at least your exploration into this moment of time, which has not all of the people in this country or across the world, but certainly some of the people in this country and across the world locked into a mode of fear, compliance, anger, all sorts of stuff with regard to the alleged global pandemic. And
Hmm.
alleged is something that we'll just leave hanging there. But for now,
Sure.
what I'm asking you about is, can the astrology that you've utilized in looking at this moment in time and the greater cosmology of this country, what kind of things can you tell us about this moment in time? Does it fit? Are there astrological pointers to tell us that this is decidedly a time of very, very dramatic change and what we might go through?
Yeah, this is a very important issue, and it's a very deep issue for many people that have been investigating it and sort of anticipating some of the events that are happening right now. And on my website, in some of the articles that I've written since the beginning of the year, I talk a little bit about some of the patterns that are going on right now in the heavens astrologically. And
Okay.
specifically, one of the big things we're going through is an alignment between Saturn and Pluto. Saturn and Pluto are in conjunction, or right now, Saturn, as of this date, Saturn is in Aquarius, but it is moving tropically. It's in Aquarius, but it's moving back into Capricorn and back into conjunction with Pluto and Jupiter. So we're seeing a situation where the heavens are presenting to us an opportunity to, in many ways, re-examine and transform the institutions that are part of our understanding of reality. And in fact, what is exactly going on. Now, right now, in the past, let's see, there was going to be one on the 4th, and there was one at the end of June and the beginning of June. Eclipses, 2 lunar
Yes.
eclipses, 1 solar eclipse. And this is also significant because of its very close connection to the transition of Saturn and the position of Pluto being conjunct with Saturn at this same time. This week, in fact, the first week of July, I've been sort of noting that, well, if things don't sort of hit the fan this week, they probably should hit the fan. And that's a little disturbing to think about. But when we back off of this and we look at the entirety of our situation from a collective standpoint, we're
Right.
really being faced with the things that we need to experience to be able to engage our powers of discernment to know what we want or we don't want. That
Well said. Yeah.
simply is what's going on. And it's more complicated than that because there's a lot more specifics. But if you keep that idea that you are being drawn into an experience where you will have to determine for yourself very clearly what you do and do not want to participate in and believe in. Remember my slogan, challenge all BS belief systems, that
Right.
really applies in this case. The belief systems that are being presented to us are a challenge. They are a challenge to us for the purpose of our consciousness expansion. Everything that we experience in this life is for that purpose, it seems, for the expansion of our consciousness. And if we begin to embrace all of our experience with that in mind, then we got a better chance at coming out of this with raising our consciousness when we finally exit this physical planet. And not have to maybe repeat some of the same things that
Yeah.
we've already experienced. So we get off of that massive karmic wheel that we all seem to be pedaling around like the hamster in the wheel for many of us. And this, of course, relates to everything. It's one of the reasons why artificial intelligence is such a prominent concern right now in transhumanism, is because we have to figure out what of that and how do we want artificial intelligence, artificial life, artificial consciousness to represent us. That is a very critical thing that we are experiencing right now with the disharmony associated with the direction that artificial intelligence seems to be going in this country and in the world. The alignments of the artificial intelligence community and its evolution is
Right.
also related to the position that corporations have been given and the amount of power that they have in our society. When you look at a skyline, every building you see is a building erected through the contribution of money to power of certain individuals or groups of
Sure.
individuals or corporations. We don't really create the pyramids anymore. We don't create temples as such anymore. We put an enormous amount of effort into creating these structures that are somehow related to a company or an organization. And, I've talked a little bit about this in the past, about the relationship between all of these things. The important thing I found is I find the astrology, particularly at this time, very useful to help as a guide in determining the sort of response, what's going on here and how do I respond to it? How do I interpret this? It
What
tells me a
What
little
about,
bit about the energy.
is there, if you will, a predictive ability of astrology to can you look up the time track, to 2 months or 3 months, and maybe in a similar way that, and I don't mean in terms of the way the data is collected, but as an example, I'm sure you're familiar with Cliff High, where he and his business partner for many years were able to track
Hmm.
certain things that were said by the certainly the American population and globally, but it's easier if it's American because it's in English. Are there AI technologies that are being used by the different software companies that are predicting things that we might be wanting to do next? I mean, other than purchasing, because I'm here's where I'm leading with this. This alleged global pandemic thing, which is really a great psyop. It's a medical false flag, if anything else. I would imagine that there's some considerable AI technology at work that is leveraging the powers that be ability they have to further engage the populace in fear, in control. Any thoughts about how astrology and AI look at both of those, or involved in both of those? I know it's a loaded question, but as an astrologer and as somebody who's looking at AI, have you drawn any conclusions about either the two of those or combined?
Well, the situation we're facing right now is the position that artificial intelligence is putting us in. It's sort of a necessary position in the sense that the growth of human society has outreached its ability to be managed or to be
Mm.
let's see.
Good point.
Maybe managed is part of that, but it's
That's
outgrown
right.
its ability to be controlled using any of the existing systems of control that have been around for hundreds of years. And that's pretty much what we're finding. Part of the reason we're finding the difficulty that we're experiencing now. We're reaching the end of the old systems and how they work. This is part of the issues surrounding the position of Saturn conjunct Pluto, which for the United States is a Pluto return, a major time period, and doesn't happen very often because Pluto borders on 250 to 300 years in its return period. So the United States has to be, has gotten a lot older and has gotten to the point now where it's in a Pluto return based on the birth chart of the United States being July 4th, 1776. How does this relate to AI? The issue seems to be that what I am seeing a lot is the idea that artificial intelligence is driving decisions. Those decisions are based on the use of artificial intelligence to analyze statistics mostly. We're looking at the averaging of our existence and the averaging of situations to come up with a conclusion, come up with a decision about how to approach a given situation. So the amount of data that has to be taken in is enormous. It's beyond a human's ability to discern. And so part of the issue with artificial intelligence and astrology is that the two in some ways seem to be diverging from each other. And I mean that in the sense that the people that are engaging deeper into artificial intelligence are buying more into the statistical analysis that artificial intelligence creates in analyzing a situation to come up with a solution. And to a certain level, that's valid, but also it doesn't take into account the cycles of the solar system from an astrological human consciousness perspective.
Right.
Right.
Well said.
So we have this issue of a disparity between human consciousness, which is more connected to the astrology, and the lack of human consciousness in some regards in its connection to artificial intelligence. So the gap that has to be closed, we could call it astrology AI gap, but it's really a human spirituality gap that has to be closed in artificial intelligence. To bring artificial intelligence and where computers are going or technology is going into a higher level of representation of who and what we really are. And that is spiritual beings. We are really spiritual beings. The physical experience we have is passive. It's passive in the sense of it happens. There's tremendous powers that we have here, but it is not the totality of our existence.
Well, that's true.
Yeah.
I think I was, and you gave me a very comprehensive answer, but I think where I was headed with this was, I'm wondering what kind of role, other than data aggregation or statistical analysis, what kind of role AI is playing for, if you will, the powers that shouldn't be, the global corporate elite who have massive computer rooms and systems that are to some degree maybe able to do some predictive kind of work in terms of, all right, what is the right moment in order to release some kind of new draconian event to further engage fear and control into the populace. And I'm sure you're aware of this. We've had these conversations many times. Like, we'll see a period of quiet for like a month and a half or 2 months before all of this COVID stuff started. We'd see a period of quiet for like a month and a half, 2 months, and then bang, there'd be a massive shooting. And be quiet for another month and a half or 2 months, and then bang, another massive shooting somewhere else. And this went on for years. Interestingly enough, that's not going on right now. But what I'm doing is I'm looking at the greater group of people and its consciousness, and maybe the way that AI is able to program them based on how they've acted. So you've got, I'm sure that the media and networks are doing all they can to provide a more fear-based programming system based on the information that they're getting and the feedback they're getting. Is AI? So here's my brain at work here. Is AI, and do you think that AI is involved in a malevolent sense doing this kind of work for the powers that shouldn't be?
Well, the malevolent aspects of AI.
And I know we're going down the rabbit hole here.
Yeah.
But go
sure.
ahead. I'm sorry. Yeah.
No, what I was going to say is the malevolent aspects of AI are a human perception. That's not to say that we couldn't design artificial intelligence, such as a killer bot that has AI embedded in it, that is, from our perspective, creating a non-beneficial experience for human beings. What I do feel is that at every level, predictive models and artificial intelligence would be the subtext of that, are being used to predict all of this. This is something they've been working on, obviously, for many years, doing predictive modeling of various scenarios. Everything from, of course, financial predictive modeling, which is how a lot of the financial world operates now, to predicting the outcomes in a society from the influence of a pandemic.
There you go.
And yeah. I feel that, the playlist that we're sort of given here about what's going down with the changes in our society could very well be driven by some of these AI predictive models, and are likely very closely driven by these predictive models, because what we're also finding is that the complexity of human society now puts us in a position that the concept of a leader has a little bit, in many ways, something of a different meaning, because there's so much weight given to the role that artificial intelligence and predictions run in determining the decisions of politics and of policies and of organizations and of people. So we are in many ways subject to that AI. At the same time, it's AI that is providing information that is interpreted by a human being and used in some way that they deem appropriate. Now, is that person doing something that is controlling and manipulative and in some ways deceptive to human beings? Perhaps. Could it be for the purposes of determining a better possible outcome or where problem spots might be? Absolutely. Because it could be used for practically anything. And because of the level of employment of artificial intelligence in so many sections of the U.S. government and other governments of the world, it's no doubt in my mind that a lot of the movement of resources and activities and things that are happening are a result of that. But make no mistake, there's still a human decision that's happening here about the actions that are taken based on that information. So, I don't know if that perhaps answered the question or not. Now, the relationship to that and astrology is, I still think, very interesting, because the astrology is right now bearing out, everything that we're going through. I mean, I saw this years ago. We're really going to be in a mess when it gets around to March, April, May time period of 2020 based on the astrology. And, the important thing to remember is these cycles have happened before. The alignments have happened at some point in the past. We have the mechanics that can show that. But the human condition and the human situation now creates the subsequent effects produced or seen in astrology. So there's a reflection there that we cannot deny. And this is why I think the astrology is so valuable.
I've seen reports from a few astrologers, including your own, a mutual friend, Joe Anthony, and others who have essentially said this era of February 2020 through November of 2020 is probably one of the most critical periods of dynamic change in human history. And because of the astrological conditions influencing all of us here on planet Earth, but with a special regard to the United States and the founding of this country. I want to hear you weigh in on this here. It seems that we may be coming to certainly the end of some old systems that no longer work, and at minimum an examination of the changes that we're going to need to make as a society if we're ever going to fix what is going so wrong right now. And I'm not talking about the people, I'm talking about systems and governance. That's what I'm talking about.
Absolutely, and this is what the astrological situation with Saturn is telling us right now, is that, and Pluto is there in conjunction with it to sort of tear down those old systems, to make us question the usefulness of how we've done things before. And what we're going to see is, coming to the end of October, as Saturn begins to move forward back through Capricorn, goes retrograde, comes out of Aquarius, moves into Capricorn, retrograde, then it begins to move forward again and moves on into Aquarius in the coming year. So the period that you mentioned, which, February to November of this year, that good solid 10-month period, is when this Saturn-Pluto conjunction is going to have so much relevance to the unfolding of events in the United States and in the world, primarily because of the position the United States has in the world as a world leader.
Right.
And so I really see that as we move into Saturn in Aquarius in the next year, that's going to push a lot of us individually and collectively towards looking at what do we feel is our responsibility for seeing that the benefit of the whole is emphasized over the benefit of individuals. That I can see as being sort of a theme for the coming year. With regards to the position of Saturn, there's a lot of other influences, but that is a primary consideration.
Is there any inference, if you will, that the benefit of the whole is going to be very important, including a change for the better? Because it's quite obvious that, and I was having this conversation with a friend of mine earlier today, and I said, you remember that movie? And I don't remember the title of it, but basically somewhere I think the first third of the movie, the man says, and it's a movie that was made in the 1980s. And so here we are almost 40 years later, right? And he says, I'm mad as hell. I'm not going to take it anymore. Takes the TV, throws it out the window. Dan, you know this.
Oh, yeah, that's network. Yeah.
Not much has changed for us as a society. How we think, collectively, how we function, we're interconnected more, we're talking more. But the systems that are in place have not changed. The system of governance has not changed. The political power elite are still in place, still pulling the strings.
This is true, and this is why things are reaching this, in many ways, this critical stage at this time, which is to draw our attention to these systems no longer serve us, these mechanisms no longer serve us, and we have to look at what can be and should be changed to meet the objective coming up, which is the benefit of the masses over the influence of individuals. Feeding the world is likely going to become a much bigger concern. It's big now, but it's likely to become even a bigger concern in the next year as we go into 2021. I recently acquired a book which was written in the late 1970s, and I don't recall the title of the book or even the author, but this individual had gone on a road trip, went all over the United States, the Southwest, California, different parts of the country, had interviewed all these different people in different organizations 40 years ago. And I'm reading through the book, and it's like, it's the same material. It's the same concepts that we're dealing with right now. Right. Nothing is really different. That's
why I brought that up.
You're
mad as hell.
And I'm not going to take it anymore.
Not going to anymore.
Right.
And so, the same programming has continued, and now it's on televisions, and it's even more overt. It's blatant,
Yeah.
especially with the older population, pharmaceuticals. But that programming has also spilled over now into the internet
Yes.
and onto people's alleged smartphones.
Well,
So,
I'll tell you one
how,
thing that I've noticed here lately. I have worked in a university environment for a period of time and have a number of former students that are friends now. And in the month of June, especially,
okay,
there is an application I use for secure communication, and it monitors my contact list and tells me who is now using that same system for communication that's more secure.
wow.
Every day in the month of June, sometimes twice a day, I had names that were jumping over and showing up over in this app. So I was having tons of former students and people that I knew. Mostly it was former students, younger
Okay.
folks, that were making this jump over to an application that would provide some security in their communication. So they get it. They understand it. There's so much pressure to conform to patterns of society that they've grown up with, but they've grown up with a lot of understanding of the kind of things that we've been talking about how, there's more to it than we've been taught. There's a lot more details to the nature of our existence than what you're going to get from corporate America.
Very, very true.
Yeah.
If we go any deeper, um, we're just going to give away your whole talk, so we're not
Yeah.
going to do that. But I will say, and I'm going to shift gears as we wrap this up, I will say that out of the 3 or 4 people that I've spoken with that claim to be experts in AI, and I'm talking to the audience right now, Dan Brock, because of his engineering training and his capacity as a multidisciplinary thinker, is one of the few unique people that looks at how AI is used and is used as a data aggregator and analysis tool as it's been created by humans on this planet, as compared to deep space sentient AI, which has nothing to do with any humans, cosmic or otherwise. Now, I'm not going to give away the rest of that, and I'm not going to let you give it away. But it makes for a very interesting and compelling talk, because I think it's valuable for people to know that there's a vast difference between cosmic, artificial, computer-generated intelligence and computers that humans have created here on Earth and their programming. Dan, I want you to say a little bit about this, but don't give away the whole story.
Absolutely. The easiest way to think about this is humans have been around, Homo sapiens sapiens. The scientific estimate is around 50,000 to 100,000 years. There are other people in the esoteric world who take that figure much further beyond on Earth
On
as a
Earth,
presence
right,
of
on
human
Earth.
beings.
Right on Earth.
But the Earth, we've only been here for, let's say, 50,000. The Earth has been here for right around, and the Sun around 5 billion.
Billion.
The best estimates of the universe's age is around 17 to 18 billion, somewhere in there. Conservatively, 15 billion. So we're really looking at the universe has already gone through so many incarnations with life, and there have been so many different forms of life out there. It is beyond our comprehension.
Above and beyond organic.
Exactly. This includes the creation by different species over countless billions of years, millions of years at least, eons,
Right. Yeah.
of artificial intelligence, artificial life, artificial consciousness. To think that what we are doing as humans to create artificial intelligence, artificial consciousness, and artificial life, and we think we've got a bead on it. Whoa,
Wrong.
let me tell
Wrong.
you, wrong. We are in a position where we really have to begin to examine not only the potential, but the reality of the existence of artificial intelligence and technology, artificial life, artificial consciousness out there in the universe that is being used by and has been used by different species of
And
life.
also the interdimensional aspect. to
Absolutely,
that.
because that is where that naturally leads. I talk about,
Surprising.
and we all understand this spiritual side of who we are. Well, eventually, we're going to reach a point where there's a spiritual side to artificial intelligence. It's my personal opinion right now that's likely limited, or at least from a human creation standpoint. I'm not going to get into reverse engineering of ET
No, no.
technology, whole nother subject,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it is something to consider. And the eventual intersection of human and non-human artificial intelligence is a major factor that is not even on most people's radar. And I am going to talk a little bit about that
Yes.
in this presentation.
Right, and we're going to have some pretty amazing discourse and bilateral conversations between you and me and all of the rest of this at this conference, because this conference is going to be very specifically focused, attendee focused, and the dialogue between all of you guys as speakers and the attendees.
And I'm looking forward to that tremendously.
Yeah.
I just really want to engage people and
Yes.
hear people's thoughts on this because, at some level we have to begin to mitigate the fear factor in all
Yes.
of this. If we just remember everything that we're experiencing is for our ultimate betterment, we've got to get it right individually and collectively, then we can begin to shine more light on the situation and begin to understand it in another way that doesn't elicit our lower, baser responses, which take us away from our higher cognitive functions and ability to
Not
feel
only
safe.
function, right, but not only feel safe and function, but also if we're in a higher, if you will, vibratory rate, a higher frequency, we're thinking clearer. We make better decisions that way. Nobody ever makes really good decisions based on fear.
Absolutely.
Ever.
The important thing is that you have to be in that state of peace and harmony with your environment in order to open up to possibilities of cognitive exploration and consciousness connection with the larger universe. And it's one of the things I think that can come out of this dialogue, having a discussion with people, is to mitigate some of the impacts of fear and to bring people back into their place of power so that we can address these things.
When information becomes knowledge, that knowledge gives people power to make better decisions. And so, guest speaker Dan Brock, AI expert, interdimensional explorer, and multidiscipline cosmic astrologer. Dan, thanks for joining me for this primer and getting ready for the conference this coming September. If people would like to reach out to you for your astrology service as a consultant, where can they best reach you?
Well, it's very simple. You can send me an email at dan@dlbrock.com. Or you can go to my website and subscribe to my newsletter and get information that I put out, which incidentally occurs on the full moon. There'll be one coming out here on the 4th of July. Talking about these larger issues doesn't in any way negate the importance of looking at our human mission on this planet. And the astrology is really good at helping with us dealing with the human mission, because we can be encumbered by so many factors from our early development and childhood and things that have happened over the course of our life. And the astrology is useful for examining that.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those of you who are listening and are curious about how Dan does what he does, I will tell you that he's got 2 levels of service. And for those of you who want to contact Dan, why don't you give them just a little bit of insight in terms of those 2 levels of cosmic astrology service, and one includes life consulting.
Yes, I'd be happy to. There's a basic 1-hour session that I can do that involves overall analysis of your astrological natal chart from both tropical and sidereal astrology. And this is the same charts that I generate when I do longer sessions. But the introductory session sort of gives you an opening into the astrology and how astrology relates to your life, and particularly your chart. And we can look at the potential for going further and deeper into specific questions that you may have. But it's really important, I think, in the very beginning to get a sort of lay of the land, why you do the things that you do, why you say the things that you say, why you think the way that you think, why in particular situations in life and in certain circumstances you behave the way that you do. I think that for a lot of people, that kind of validation of understanding, well, this is not just out of the blue, this is in my pattern
Right.
of how I do things, is really valuable because it cements an awareness of who you are in this physical incarnation. And that in turn relates to the cosmic incarnation, where you have come from, what you're trying to experience in this life.
And so, if you will please now sort of encapsulate the second tier of the cosmic life assessment that you can also provide for people. It's obviously more in depth.
Yes, the higher level of session that I do could run 2 hours, 2.5, possibly 3 hours, depending on the situation. And in that, what I can do is take the questions that an individual generates and then juxtapose that with what the astrology is saying about the nature of those questions, how to answer them, and specifically with the idea of looking at where you are coming from in this life from a cosmic source. So I recall working with individuals that use the star ancestry readings that Adana comes up with, and I find that information matches really well with the astrology. It's sometimes frighteningly well.
Wow. I don't think we kind of quite got into this earlier in our conversation, but Dan Brock has very unique, well developed gifts and skills because he's been doing interdimensional work for years. So he can pull on his interdimensional resources and his interdimensional knowledge and give you a perspective that we are calling this greater cosmic astrology assessment, this life assessment. And that's why Dan's process is different than, say, other astrologers.
Absolutely. The thing that I don't advertise as broadly is, I have what some folks would call psychic ability and
Right.
certainly multidimensional ability and sensitivity to the larger field of consciousness in which we're all immersed.
Thank you.
And you can get information from that in many different levels. And a lot of times I've had situations where literally the universe is speaking to me about a particular circumstance or situation. And
Right.
this is, of course, related to the astrology. The astrology becomes a conduit for that information and
Right.
a
Right.
catalyst. So it's very important. It's a little bit different and makes the session border a bit more of a psychic reading, but that I feel is a component to how things work to get the most appropriate information for a session and a client.
Yeah. Yeah. And it gives them a more expansive and more detailed look in terms of who they really are, where they're going, et cetera, et cetera. So
Precisely.
awesome. All right. Well, thank you for answering that question. I really appreciate it. So for those of you who are interested in any of Dan's astrology consulting services, please feel free to contact him, and I'm sure he'll be happy to help you out.
Yes, and that's at dan@dlbrock.com. Just email me and I'll get back to you.
Awesome. Dan, thanks again. This has been a great conversation.
Thank you. And I'm